Metroid Prime Remastered makes me very happy for a number of reasons. 1, it exists. 2, it's a great remaster of one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, and my personal favorite game. But what I really love is that this game gives us a hint, a glimpse into the future. More specifically, it gives us a better idea of what Metroid Prime 4 is going to be like. And it also reminds us of the things that it can improve on. Because even though Metroid Prime is a masterpiece of a game, it certainly isn't perfect, and this remaster also is not perfect. So let's discuss what Metroid Prime Remastered possibly tells us about Metroid Prime 4. Tell me your secrets! Starting with the obvious, Metroid Prime Remastered is a beautiful game. It is one of the best looking titles on the Nintendo Switch, and it's safe to say that Metroid Prime 4 will follow suit looking just as good, if not better. I'm gonna be honest with you all. I did not think that the Switch would be able to handle a game that looks and runs this good, and that made me nervous for Metroid Prime 4 because I wanted that game to look as stunning as the Metroid Prime trilogy did on GameCube and Wii. And after seeing how some games these past few years have looked and performed on the Switch, namely Bayonetta 3, which has a tough time at maintaining 60 FPS, I was afraid for Metroid Prime 4, but after seeing this remaster, all my fears have been washed away. This game looks absolutely stunning. It has a stylized realism that is just beautiful to look at, but the best part is that it runs at a stable 60 frames per second. I have not noticed this frame rate dip once, and that's the most shocking part of this game. And it makes great use of anti-aliasing because this game runs at 900p, not even a full 1080p, and it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like a full HD game. And it's mind-blowing that this is running on a modified version of the same engine used for Metroid Prime 20 years ago. Retro Studios really has something special on their hands with this engine, so I can't wait to see what they do with Metroid Prime 4. I imagine the style is going to look quite similar to Metroid Prime Remastered. I mean, it'd be strange if Prime Remastered looked like this and then Prime 4 looked more like something akin to Metroid Dread where it's more cel-shaded. No, Prime 4 definitely has to look like Prime Remastered. What else would it look like? And while we're on the subject of looks, let's talk about Samus's new one shown at the end of Metroid Prime Remastered. This is a new design that we've never seen before, so we gotta think that this will reappear in Metroid Prime 4. I mean, why else would you redesign Samus's look if you're not gonna use it in future installments? Plus, it's a great character model that looks just as good as the rest of the game. Which brings me to my next topic. Because this game looks and runs so well, it leads me to believe that Metroid Prime 4 is not going to be an open world game. Of course, there was never confirmation that this was going to be open world, but I did hear a lot of people speculate that it could be taking a Breath of the Wild sort of route, but I disagreed with that because for one, the open world setting is kind of an antithesis to Metroidvania. It's possible to make an open world Metroidvania. I mean, look at Batman Arkham City, but Metroidvanias, in my opinion, have always worked best when they're set in tight corridors, whether it be 2D or 3D, and I just don't see Metroid Prime 4 taking that jump, especially if it's supposed to look as good as Metroid Prime Remastered. Part of the reason why Prime Remastered was able to look this good is because of those tight corridors. The game renders each room at a time instead of one big open world at once. At least that's the way my non-game developer brain understands it. Now, I'm not opposed to an open world Metroid game, but I just think that the corridor-based gameplay is too important for the Metroid series, as well as the Metroid Prime series, and again, because Prime Remastered looks and runs so well, I gotta think that they're sticking to the gameplay style of Prime Remastered. Not to mention, this style still works really well. Not every game has to be open world these days. I mean, if you want to use an example other than Prime Remastered, look no further than the Dead Space remake. That game very much has Metroidvania elements, and it has an interconnected map with corridor-based level design. No question, this 3D Metroidvania gameplay style has aged beautifully, so I gotta think that they're planning to do the same thing for Metroid Prime 4. This remaster was being made to test the capabilities of the Switch and what they could do with Prime 4 on that hardware. And it was also a great way to test what they can do with the controls. And that's why I think Prime 4 is going to have the same control styles as the remaster. Those being the new dual stick controls, the classic controls that were on the GameCube, the pointer controls from the Metroid Prime trilogy, and that strange hybrid control scheme where gyro works with the classic controls. I'm not a huge fan of that. And as cool as it is to have those options, I really thought that the big test here were those dual stick controls. Because before the remaster, there has never been an official way to play Metroid Prime with those traditional dual stick controls, which have become an industry standard these days. So I believe this was Retro's way of testing out how to get this working with a Metroid Prime game, and in my opinion they pulled it off with flying colors, because I'm going to find it really hard to revisit the original Metroid Prime without those dual stick controls. They just worked so well. So even if all the control options aren't going to be there for Prime 4, the real test of the remaster was pulling off those dual stick controls, which are undoubtedly going to be the default in Prime 4. And it might also utilize HD Rumble in interesting ways, because the Prime Remaster uses it to have players feel the impact of Samus hitting the ground during jumps on her feet, and in Morph Ball. Which reminds me, that Morph Ball jump needs to come back. It's just too good to scrap entirely. And while the intent of this remaster was to stay true to the original, that means some elements haven't aged particularly well, but it's likely that Prime 4 will improve upon them, such as the map. Not just the literal map that you look at to know where you're going, but the level design in general. It's not as fluid as I would like it to be. It's especially felt during the endgame quest for the rest of the Chozo artifacts, and if you're trying to 100% the game, everything is just spread out so far, which wouldn't have been a problem if there was a feature like maybe fast travel in a way that Metroid Dread does it with teleport stations, or even later Prime games. Once you acquired the light suit in Metroid Prime 2, you were able to fast travel through the light shafts in each area. Only a specific point on each area, but it was still fast travel nonetheless. In Prime 3, even though it was incredibly slow, there were also travel points as well through Samus's gunship. Keep in mind that these are not faults of the remaster, as the intent of the remaster was to really just overhaul the visuals and controls, but it does make me hope that Metroid Prime 4 either has a map that's better interconnected with better shortcuts that make going through areas quicker, or they incorporate the teleport stations from Metroid Dread and Samus Returns. Even if Prime 4 didn't make those improvements though, you know it would really help though, pins that you can place on the map. You don't know how many times I've seen an item that I couldn't access in Metroid Prime and thought, wow, I'm going to forget where this is right away. It'd be really helpful if I could indicate on the map where that item is. Metroid Dread did this way better in that the items that you see on screen that you couldn't access were still pinned on the map automatically. So a feature like this in Prime 4 would be absolutely beneficial. But now I want to talk about the scan visor. This is a quintessential feature in Metroid Prime, but it made me wonder how newcomers feel about it, because let's be real, some might think that this slows the game's pacing down, even though it's optional most of the time. You don't have to scan every single thing, you don't have to go for a 100% logbook completion, but it still made me think if there was a way they could streamline this process a bit. But if it were up to me, I wouldn't change a thing about the scan visor. I think it's very cool, I've grown attached to it in my many years playing the Metroid Prime games, so I took to Twitter to ask the newcomers about this, and it turns out a lot of people liked it more so than didn't like it or didn't care about it. I did get some notes though from other users saying that it feels very dated and slow. I even had some veterans come in explaining that it could be toned down a bit for Prime 4, or that it just shouldn't be changed at all because it really amplifies the atmosphere. So this is clearly a very complex topic. I think the scan visor is totally fine as being an optional thing, especially since it's not used all the time, but it's still a topic worth discussing on if they could streamline it a bit for Metroid Prime 4. I don't think it should go away at all. If somebody wants to get 100% logbook scans for Prime 4, let them do it. And if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it. But now I want to end on the most exciting parts of what the Metroid Prime Remaster means for Metroid Prime 4. For one, the fact that the remaster is already out means that Metroid Prime 4 is probably coming very soon. I don't mean in the next 2 months or something, maybe as soon as this holiday season, maybe even a bit later, early next year, mid next year, because after all, if they've been sitting on Metroid Prime Remastered since mid 2021, according to what reports have said, why else would they release it in February 2023 if they didn't think Metroid Prime 4 was coming sooner than later? It just makes me really excited for this next year. Even if we don't get Prime 4 this year, that must mean we're getting Prime 2 and 3 remastered this year as well. Just many exciting things, but what really makes me the most excited for Prime 4 is that it is in good hands with Retro Studios, and that is what Metroid Prime Remastered ultimately proved, is that Retro Studios has still got it. That's what I've been wondering for the past decade, because ever since they came out with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze in 2014, I was always wondering what they'd do next, and we got almost 10 years of silence, and a Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze Switch port with a new funky mode. Actually, since this game features a Metroid and Samus's ship in a forest, maybe Metroid Prime 4 is going to be set in the world of Donkey Kong? Okay, that's not happening. Still, this is Retro Studios' first big release in 9 years, and they just knocked it out of the park, coming out with a remaster that is one of the best looking and best performing games on Nintendo Switch, and it proved that Metroid Prime still holds up even after 20 years later. Initially, I had my concerns that Metroid Prime 4 wouldn't live up to my high standards, but after seeing the quality of this remaster, I have more than enough faith in Retro Studios that they can give us a fantastic new entry in the Metroid Prime series, and I can't wait to see what that looks like.